It started with the disappearance of a few barrels, nothing unusual in the world of high-end spirits, where thefts are rare but not unheard of. But what followed stunned authorities and rocked the bourbon industry to its core. Over $500,000 worth of premium bourbon had been stolen in what would become known as the biggest bourbon theft in American history. And at the center of it all was a man whose charm masked a cold, calculating criminal mind. A man who has now escaped from prison once again. The heist that shook Kentucky. In the heart of Kentucky, where bourbon isn't just a drink, but a legacy. A massive theft from some of the most iconic distilleries sent shockwaves across the state. Dozens of barrels of high-end bourbon, including rare and expensive bottles of Pappy Van Winkle, began to vanish without a trace. What started as an internal investigation soon turned into a statewide manhunt. Authorities eventually uncovered a well-orchestrated operation involving multiple employees, forged shipping documents, and a black market network for selling stolen bourbon. This was no ordinary theft. It was a heist fueled by inside knowledge, executed with military-like precision, and kept hidden for years. The case was dubbed Pappygate by the media, a nod to the highly coveted Pappy Van Winkle bourbon that formed a significant part of the loot. The story captivated the nation, not just because of the rare booze involved, but because of the man pulling the strings behind the scenes. Meet Gilbert "Toby" Kurtzinger, the mastermind. At the heart of the bourbon heist was Gilbert "Toby" Kurtzinger, a longtime employee of one of Kentucky's top bourbon distilleries. On the surface, Kurtzinger appeared to be a regular family man, a softball coach, a warehouse worker, someone known in the community. But beneath that calm exterior was a career criminal, with a deep understanding of how to manipulate systems and people. Kurtzinger didn't just steal bourbon. He built a mini-empire off it. Over the years, he used his position to gradually smuggle out barrels and bottles, selling them on the black market for tens of thousands of dollars. His operation involved co-workers, friends, and even his own home, where barrels were hidden in plain sight. He used coded language in text messages and went to great lengths to avoid suspicion. When police finally raided his property, they found more than just bourbon. They found steroids, illegal firearms, and a criminal enterprise that had gone unchecked for nearly a decade. A history of crime and escapes. Kurtzinger wasn't new to crime. Prior to the bourbon heist, he had already been investigated for trafficking performance-enhancing drugs and had brushes with the law related to illegal firearm possession. Despite his seemingly quiet life, he had the makings of a seasoned criminal, disciplined, manipulative, and always one step ahead. After being sentenced to 15 years in prison, many believed the saga was over. But Kurtzinger had other plans. In a daring escape that echoes the ingenuity of his heist, he broke out of prison, not once, but now a second time, evading security systems and launching yet another manhunt. His escape has renewed fear among distillery owners and law enforcement officials alike, who worry what he may be planning next. This is no ordinary thief. This is a man who turned bourbon into black gold and refuses to stay behind bars. In the annals of American crime, few thefts have been as audacious, or as bizarre, as the infamous bourbon heist that rocked Kentucky's bourbon industry to its core. This wasn't a typical robbery involving bank vaults or armored trucks. It was slow, methodical, and inside-driven. Over the span of several years, an underground network siphoned off thousands of dollars worth of rare bourbon, including some of the most expensive and prestigious labels in the world. And for a long time, no one noticed. The inside job, planning the perfect bourbon theft. The mastermind, Gilbert "Toby" Kurtzinger, was no outsider. As an employee at Buffalo Trace Distillery, he had access, trust, and, most importantly, knowledge. He knew where the rare barrels were stored, how inventory was tracked, and when security was most relaxed. Rather than a dramatic overnight heist, Kurtzinger opted for a long game, one that allowed him to slip under the radar while building a steady flow of stolen goods. He enlisted co-workers, friends, and even family members into the operation. Barrels of high-end bourbon would be carefully removed from storage facilities and sold privately. Kurtzinger made sure to disguise the thefts so they wouldn't raise alarms, hiding barrels in personal storage sheds, garages, and even using coded text messages to coordinate transactions. This was organized crime in the most unexpected of settings, a rural Kentucky town steeped in bourbon tradition. What was stolen, and its jaw-dropping value among the stolen goods, were bottles and barrels of the legendary Pappy Van Winkle bourbon, a brand so rare and revered that bottles can sell for thousands on the open market. Pappy Van Winkle is aged for 15 to 23 years, and demand for it far exceeds supply. Stealing just a few bottles was enough to draw media attention. But this wasn't just a few bottles. In total, more than 200 bottles of rare bourbon and over 20 full barrels were stolen over the years. The estimated street value of the stolen bourbon was more than $100,000, though collectors and connoisseurs argue it could have fetched much more on the black market. Some individual barrels were worth upwards of $10,000 each, and the stolen Pappy Van Winkle alone became the stuff of legend in bourbon circles. The unraveling. How the heist was discovered. For years, the theft went undetected. Inventory discrepancies were minor, and the operation was so spread out that it didn't trigger suspicion. That changed in 2013 when the distillery reported missing bottles of Pappy Van Winkle. The media caught wind of the story and dubbed it Pappygate, turning what was once a quiet theft into a national headline. Investigators from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office began digging into the theft, and suspicion quickly turned toward insiders at the distillery. A breakthrough came in 2015, when police received a tip about illegal steroid sales, a lead that surprisingly tied back to Kurtzinger. During a search of his home, officers found several barrels of stolen bourbon sitting in his backyard, partially hidden but unmistakable. Alongside the barrels were illegal firearms and performance-enhancing drugs, further deepening the criminal web. This discovery cracked the case wide open. A grand jury indicted 9 people connected to the operation, including Kurtzinger, who was charged with multiple felonies ranging from theft and conspiracy to possession of controlled substances. The community was shocked. This was a man they knew, trusted, even admired. But the evidence was undeniable. What began as a seemingly minor inventory glitch turned into one of the most iconic liquor thefts in U.S. history. And while law enforcement may have dismantled the bourbon ring, the legend of the infamous heist, and the man behind it, continues to grow, especially now that he's escaped custody once again. For years, Gilbert Toby Kurtzinger operated in the shadows, stealing high-end bourbon from the very distillery where he worked. But even the most carefully crafted criminal enterprises eventually unravel, and Kurtzinger's came crashing down thanks to a mistake he didn't even realize he'd made. How the authorities caught him. The breakthrough in the bourbon heist case came not through missing inventory reports or surveillance footage, but through a seemingly unrelated drug investigation. In early 2015, detectives from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office were tipped off about a local steroid distribution ring. As they followed the trail, all signs began pointing to none other than Kurtzinger, a name already floating around in bourbon circles as someone who might know more than he let on about the missing barrels of Pappy Van Winkle. When authorities searched his home in Franklin County, they found far more than just steroids. Sitting in plain sight were several full barrels of stolen bourbon, including some from Wild Turkey Distillery, still sealed, unmarked, and clearly not meant for personal use. Inside the garage and storage sheds were more bottles, equipment, and stolen goods that connected Kurtzinger directly to the infamous heist. It was the smoking gun investigators had been searching for. Kurtzinger was immediately arrested and charged with a long list of offenses, including theft by unlawful taking, receiving stolen property, trafficking in anabolic steroids, and possession of controlled substances and illegal firearms. The man who had once been seen as a devoted family man and loyal employee was now at the center of one of the most high-profile liquor thefts in American history. His trial, conviction, and sentencing. In 2017, Kurtzinger stood trial in a courtroom filled with reporters, bourbon executives, and stunned locals. Prosecutors laid out a mountain of evidence, including text messages, witness testimonies, and photos of the stolen bourbon. painting a clear picture of a years-long operation involving theft, distribution, and cover-up. Kurtzinger initially denied all charges, claiming he was being framed or scapegoated. But as the evidence piled up, he took a plea deal, pleading guilty to multiple felony charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He admitted to stealing bourbon, trafficking in steroids, and possessing illegal firearms. The judge sentenced Kurtzinger to 15 years in prison, calling the crime a serious betrayal of trust and emphasizing the damage done not only to the bourbon industry, but to the public's perception of justice in a close-knit community. For many, the sentence was a moment of closure, the end of a wild story that had gripped Kentucky for years. Life in prison and trouble behind bars. But prison did not tame Toby Kurtzinger. While some criminals fade quietly into the prison system, Kurtzinger continued to make waves behind bars. According to reports from prison staff and fellow inmates, he quickly adapted to life on the inside, gaining influence among prisoners and using his leadership skills, once applied to coordinating thefts, to control certain underground dealings in prison. There were whispers of him exchanging goods for favors, involvement in contraband circulation, and even helping orchestrate disputes between rival inmates. Though never officially confirmed, these rumors added to his growing mythos as a manipulative and cunning figure, even behind bars. Most alarmingly, Kurtzinger began plotting his escape. Guards later discovered scribbled notes in his cell, maps, timetables, and lists of potential weak points in the prison's security system. He studied routines, formed alliances, and took advantage of lapses in oversight. His previous experience in orchestrating a long-term heist seemed to translate disturbingly well to prison life. Despite increased surveillance, Kurtzinger managed to escape, not once, but twice, sending shockwaves through the justice system and reigniting fears that the man behind the Bourbon heist wasn't done yet. His most recent escape has sparked a renewed manhunt, with law enforcement agencies working around the clock to track him down before he disappears into the shadows once more. After being sentenced to 15 years behind bars for his role in America's largest bourbon theft, Gilbert "Toby" Kurtzinger was supposed to fade from public memory. His name had become synonymous with betrayal and greed, and justice had seemingly been served. But what authorities didn't anticipate was that Kurtzinger, even in a high-security environment, was still plotting, still calculating, and in a twist worthy of a Hollywood thriller, he escaped from prison. Again. A calculated break, how he managed to escape, again. Kurtzinger's second escape wasn't a crime of impulse. It was the result of months, possibly years, of patient observation, manipulation, and planning. He knew the prison's routine inside and out, when guards changed shifts, which corridors had blind spots, and how security systems rotated. More importantly, he knew people and how to use them. According to prison records and internal investigations, Kurtzinger slowly earned the trust of guards and inmates alike. He portrayed himself as a model prisoner, cooperative, respectful, and low risk. That persona allowed him to move with less scrutiny. Behind that mask, however, he was quietly laying the groundwork for his escape. The break happened during a maintenance shift change. Kurtzinger, having gained access to tools and uniforms through a prison work program, disguised himself as a contractor. With forged identification and a duplicate access badge, possibly acquired through inside help, he slipped past 2 security checkpoints. Surveillance footage later revealed how calmly and confidently he walked out the gates, blending in with a group of workers. It wasn't until a full head count hours later that officials realized he was missing. The escape plan. Precision and possible inside help. Investigators believe that Kurtzinger had assistance, though the extent of it remains unclear. One prison guard was placed under internal review for negligence and possible collusion. Another inmate claimed Kurtzinger had spoken about not wasting his life behind concrete walls, and hinted that timing was everything. There are also reports of a burner phone discovered in Kurtzinger's cell, suggesting communication with someone outside the prison. The escape route itself was ingenious. After leaving the facility, Kurtzinger switched vehicles twice. The first reportedly a maintenance van, and the second an unmarked SUV parked several blocks away. Traffic cameras later captured a blurry image of what may have been him at a gas station 30 miles from the prison, but since then, no credible sightings have emerged. It was clear. Kurtzinger didn't just walk away. He vanished. Shock and scramble. The immediate reaction. The public's reaction was a mixture of disbelief and fear. How could a convicted felon, already infamous for orchestrating a major theft, manage to escape from prison again? Social media erupted with speculation, while local news stations ran round-the-clock coverage. Some joked that he was off sipping Pappy Van Winkle on a tropical island. Others weren't laughing. Law enforcement agencies launched a massive manhunt across multiple states. Roadblocks were set up, airports were alerted, and U.S. Marshals joined the search. Distilleries in Kentucky were warned to tighten their security, fearing that Kurtzinger might return to the world he once exploited so well. Franklin County Sheriff's Office held a press conference within 24 hours, acknowledging failures in the prison's security system and promising swift action. "This man is dangerous, deceptive, and now desperate," the sheriff said. "We will not stop until he is back where he belongs." Meanwhile, community members felt a growing unease. Kurtzinger was no ordinary thief. He was a mastermind who had eluded justice once before. Now, with nothing to lose and everything to gain, the question wasn't just where he was, but what he was planning. The escape of Gilbert "Toby" Kurtzinger has triggered one of the most intense manhunts in recent Kentucky history. Once known as the mastermind behind the largest bourbon theft in American history, Kurtzinger is now a fugitive for the second time, and law enforcement agencies are racing against the clock to find him before he disappears for good. Current efforts to recapture him. Within hours of confirming his escape, local, state, and federal authorities launched a full-scale search. The U.S. Marshals Service has taken the lead, bringing in fugitive task forces from neighboring states, including Indiana, Tennessee, and Ohio. Kurtzinger's photo has been circulated across law enforcement networks, with updated images digitally aged to account for disguise or physical changes. Drones, helicopters, and search dogs have been deployed around the region, especially in rural parts of Franklin County, where Kurtzinger once lived and worked. Authorities believe he may still have allies in the area, individuals who could provide shelter, transportation, or even money. In addition, investigators are combing through his known associations and communication records, trying to identify any possible escape route or planned hideout. Surveillance footage from gas stations, ATMs, bus terminals, and highway toll booths is being reviewed for any sign of his movement. Despite these massive efforts, Kurtzinger has so far managed to stay one step ahead. Warnings issued to the public. As the search intensifies, authorities have urged the public to remain cautious and vigilant. "Do not approach this individual under any circumstance," said Sheriff Joe Hall in a televised statement. "He is not only a convicted felon, but a manipulative and dangerous man who has proven he will do whatever it takes to stay free." Flyers and digital alerts have been distributed statewide, and a dedicated tip line has been set up for citizens to report any suspicious activity. A $25,000 reward has also been announced for information leading to Kurtzinger's arrest. Residents in Kentucky and surrounding areas have been advised to lock their doors, check their security systems, and report any unknown visitors. Distilleries, particularly those tied to the original Pappygate case, have heightened their on-site security and are operating under tight surveillance, fearing that Kurtzinger may return to familiar territory for one final score. Where might he be headed, and what comes next? The big question haunting both investigators and the public is, where is he going, and what will he do next? There are several theories. Some believe Kurtzinger has fled the state entirely, possibly using fake IDs and prearranged help to cross state lines unnoticed. Others suspect he might be hiding in plain sight, staying with someone he trusts in rural Kentucky, or laying low in a major city under a new identity. Given his criminal history, some experts fear he may be planning another illegal operation. "He's a planner, not a wanderer," said one retired FBI profiler. "He doesn't run without a goal. If he's out, it's because he has a plan." Some speculate that he may try to flee the country altogether. Airports and border crossings have been alerted, and agents are monitoring ticket sales and passport activity under aliases once linked to him. However, with increased surveillance at ports of entry and facial recognition technology, escaping the country would be risky. Until he's found, communities remain on edge. People remember the Bourbon heist not just because of what was stolen, but because of how cleverly it was done. If Kurtzinger could pull off such a calculated crime from within a legitimate job and then escape prison twice, it's anyone's guess what he's capable of now. One thing is certain, the manhunt isn't over. And until Toby Kurtzinger is brought back into custody, Kentucky, and the nation, will remain alert, watching every shadow, waiting for the next move in a story that has become stranger than fiction.